This video from August 27th, 2021 shows 15 buildings under construction in the city of Kunming in China being demolished simultaneously. The reason for such demolition is simply that the builders ran out of money to finish them because they couldn't find people willing to buy those apartments. While this made headlines worldwide, it's not an isolated case. Throughout China, the construction boom that drove the Chinese economy for the past 20 years is losing momentum. And the primary reason is that the population of China is decreasing. In today's video, I'll tell you what's happening with the Chinese real estate market, why the population of China is dramatically decreasing to the point of being in danger, and what consequences this might have for China and the rest of the world. This graph shows the number of square meters built per year in China. The blue part represents residential housing, the orange part represents commercial premises, and the gray part represents offices. Construction had a strong growth from the early 2000s but reached its peak in 2021 and then started to decline. The projection is that it will continue to fall in the years 2023, 2024, and 2025. The situation is so serious that there are entire cities that are almost uninhabited, like ghost towns, because people in China have stopped buying homes. Apartments were bought by middle-class Chinese investors as a safe place to put their money, but it's no longer a secure investment as property prices are dropping. The variation in property prices between 2019 and 2021 shows that while home prices grew, the pace slowed, and in 2022, they fell by almost 1%. This is causing construction companies to run out of money as they borrowed a considerable amount to build these apartments, and now they can't repay. One of the major reasons for this is the declining population. In 2022, for the first time in modern Chinese history, the total population fell from 1.412 billion in 2021 to 1.411 billion in 2022. For a real estate market to grow, an increase in population is necessary. If the population starts to decline, the demand for apartments and housing will become smaller and smaller. According to a United Nations estimate, by 202, India could surpass China as the world's most populous country, and the Chinese population will continue to fall, reaching half of what it is today by 2100. This population decline is happening not only in China, but also in other East and Northwest Asian countries, such as Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. These countries, represented by the blue line, will also experience a population decline in the coming years as people in these nations are choosing to have fewer children. However, in China, it's happening rapidly. The main reason is the one-child policy that the Chinese government imposed in 1979, requiring Chinese couples to have a maximum of one child. This was done because the authorities saw population growth as a significant problem that could lead to economic issues, unemployment, and difficulties in providing enough food and housing for the citizens. They enlisted the help of experts like Song John, an aerospace engineer and demographer, to analyze the issue. His predictions in the 1970s suggested that China's population would reach 4 billion in a century if the number of children per family was not limited. This alarmed the government, and they decided to reduce the population by implementing new laws, such as couples only being allowed to marry after turning 26 and having only one child. At that time, people rarely had children before marriage. Setting a minimum age of 26 for marriage would delay couples from having children. Moreover, they could only have one child, significantly reducing the population in the long run as people died of old age. To ensure compliance, the government started tightly controlling couples capable of having children, imposing economic fines on those with more than one child. They also offered money and good jobs to those adhering to the policy. This led to situations where those with 2 or more children ended up poor, either due to being unable to access good jobs or having to pay government fines. In addition, in every neighborhood of major cities, the government set up family planning clinics. These clinics maintained records of people who had been sterilized, women taking contraceptive pills, and couples who had signed contracts with the government, promising not to have more children. Even in some rural areas where people were less educated and more prone to having more children, individuals were sterilized against their will. The black line shows the number of sterilized individuals, and the blue line represents the number of abortions. Both increased significantly in the early 80s. The children born in the 1980s and 1990s became the first generation of only children dubbed Little Emperors because they received all the attention from their parents, who did their best to provide them with the best. However, the one-child policy had more consequences than just reducing the number of births. In the 1980s, families preferred having a male child due to cultural and economic reasons. The son would live with his parents throughout his life, providing income to the family. This preference, combined with the inability to choose the sex of the child, led to a significant gender imbalance. Many couples, upon finding out they were expecting a girl, chose to abort, abandon, or even let the child die at birth. This has led to an estimated 30 to 60 million missing girls either through abortion or neonatal deaths. By the early 2000s, there were 120 men for every 100 women in China. This gender imbalance affected the housing market as women considered a man owning a home essential for marriage, driving up property prices. While the one-child policy achieved its goal of preventing around 400 million births, it was highly unpopular and caused numerous problems, such as abortions, abandonment, and murders of female infants, as well as an overpopulation of unmarried men. In 2010, the Chinese government realized it had a generation of soon-to-retire workers with only one child. This would lead to an imbalance between the elderly population needing medical care and pensions and not enough young people working to generate the necessary taxes to cover these expenses. The government began contemplating whether to allow people to have more than one child. However, to answer this question, they needed accurate population data. Governments typically conduct a census to determine the size of their population. It's a mandatory survey where all residents must answer questions about household size, the number of children and adults, and gender distribution. However, what the government didn't anticipate was the extent of people lying while responding to the census. Many parents with more than one child kept their additional children hidden at home, unable to even send them to school, and lied when answering census questions. Other cases included individuals falsely claiming that their deceased relatives were still alive to continue receiving pensions. Even government officials manipulated data in their favor. For instance, a small-town mayor might receive more funds for family planning clinics if they reported a higher population, leading them to falsify records to receive more money from the national government. Those cases had many others, and what ended up happening was that the census conducted by the government yielded data that was not accurate at all. Some experts, like Professor Gifan, a demographer and researcher at Winston-Madison University, believed that the government was overestimating its population by 10%, counting millions of people who didn't actually exist. The blue line represents the population estimates made by the government between the early 90s and 2000, while the red line shows the projection made by Gifan. In 2008, the government estimated a population close to 1.32 billion, but Gifan's calculations suggested around 1.227 billion. In 2013, the new Chinese president, Xi Jinping, relaxed the one-child policy. Couples were allowed to have a second child if either of the parents had grown up as an only child. Later on, the policy was further relaxed, allowing all couples to have a second child, regardless of their parents having siblings. The idea behind this decision was to encourage people to have more children to address the problem of an aging population and insufficient young people. However, things didn't go as planned. Millennials, born between 1981 and 1993, were the best educated generation in China's history. Being only children, their parents invested a lot in their education. Now, in their 30s and 40s, they are opting not to have more than one child. On one hand, they want to provide everything to their child, similar to what their parents provided to them. On the other hand, having grown up as only children, they see no advantage in having more than one child. Many of them decide not to pursue additional children, as it would significantly impact their lifestyle. The graph illustrates the number of children each woman has throughout her life in China. After dropping to almost one child per person due to the one-child policy, the number of children per woman remains stable. Despite a slight increase in 2016, following the allowance of more children in 2013, the value returned to the previous average in 2017. In fact, the fertility rate, representing the number of children a woman has in her lifetime, dropped to a historic minimum of 1.09 in 2022. This is why the Chinese population reached its peak in 2021. Although Professor Giff believes that the population actually peaked in 2018 and continues to show growth until 2021 due to errors in the censuses, the population is now decreasing. This poses a threat to the growth of the Chinese economy. For instance, in the real estate sector, where fewer houses will be sold, many large Chinese construction companies were building homes for the growing Chinese population, making the Chinese real estate industry one of the world's largest. A study in 2021 projected that by 2030, China would dominate 24% of the global construction market. However, for this to happen, people need to keep buying, driving up prices. Otherwise, these construction companies won't be able to repay the loans they took to build all those buildings. Now that these companies are running out of money and stopping construction, many countries will face consequences. For example, Australia is the world's largest iron producer, a material essential for building. The bars in this graph represent the products Australia sells to China, and the green part of the bar is iron. If China stops building, it won't need as much iron, and Australia will lose a significant source of income. Iron-producing companies in Australia will start producing less, laying off thousands of workers. The same will happen with other products that also serve to manufacture buildings, such as cement. If China's population continues to decrease, they will also stop buying other products like food and clothing, which China also purchases from other countries. The era of population growth in China has come to an end, and the debts that Chinese companies took on during years of growth are becoming unpayable. The crisis has begun in the real estate market, and as we watch videos of apartment buildings being demolished, all we can do is hope that the rest of the Chinese economy doesn't collapse as well. Other countries like Spain are also experiencing an investment in the age pyramid, meaning there are more elderly people than young ones, and the birth rate is continuously declining. They aim to compensate for this population shortage with immigration, but China is a much more closed country than the West. Therefore, the short and medium-term consequences of this Chinese crisis for the rest of the world are immeasurable. Previously, they had excess population. Now they are facing a population shortage. With such a closed government like China's, who knows if they will manage to sustain themselves? Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment. Also, please consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.